I'd like to thank all of you for joining us at York Regional Police Headquarters. This press conference is being held to provide an update on a cold case, a 51-year-old homicide investigation. Our speakers today are Deputy Chief Alvaro Almeida, who's the Deputy Chief of Investigations for York Regional Police, to my left, and to the left of the Deputy Chief is Detective Jonathan Nauman, who is a detective with our cold case unit. Following the prepared statements, there's going to be a brief opportunity for some questions and answers. I'm now going to turn things over to Deputy Chief Almeida.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for attending here this morning. We have some very significant news that we wanted to share with you all and with members of our community. After 51 years, the hardworking members of the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit have solved the cruel and ruthless murder of Yvonne Leroux, who was 16 years old at the time of her death. Despite the sad circumstances of Yvonne's death, I am gratified to be able to deliver her family this resolution, if not closure. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been living all these years with such a loss and not knowing all this time who was responsible. We are relieved to be able to give them that today. As you've heard, Yvonne's family has prepared a statement which will be shared with you later this morning. I want to say how proud I am of Detective Nauman, Detective Sergeant Tom Kober, and Inspector Paulo Fiore, and all the hardworking officers who have worked on this case over the decades. And there have been many, including Staff Sergeant Joe Amatoguchi, who is here today on his last day in the workplace. Currently, our cold case unit is staffed with a group of persistent and highly trained investigators. But we don't work alone. The assistance of our law enforcement partners has been pivotal to our success in this investigation. The York Regional Police would like to thank the Toronto Police Homicide Cold Case Unit for their assistance, which has been invaluable in solving this case. Our thanks go to the Center of Forensic Sciences, the Office of the Chief Coroner, and the Ministry of the Attorney General for their legal guidance. Yvonne's case certainly highlights the importance of collaboration and the work itself. It's a testament to the dedication of the investigators that they have continued their efforts despite the investigative roadblocks and the passage of time. I can tell you, as a former homicide investigator, that there's a very real human connection between the victim and their families. Their empathy and the compassion didn't allow them to give up, even when there was no new information or evidence and little hope of resolution. Their tenacity, determination, and drive are commendable, and I congratulate them all for their work. Now I'll turn it over to Detective Nauman, who will provide you with the details of the investigation. Thank you.
I'm Detective Jonathan Nauman of the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit under the Homicide and Major Case Management Bureau. I am pleased to be here today to provide our community and the media with an update on a 50-year-old homicide that up until recently remained unsolved. On November 29th, 1972, 16-year-old Yvonne Leroux was last seen alive at 10 p.m. walking in the area of Oakdale Road and Finch Avenue West in the city of Toronto. The next morning, a passerby discovered Yvonne's lifeless body in the middle of 16th Sideroad between Jane Street and Keele Street in the Township of King. This was 24 kilometers north of where she was seen the night before. She sustained blunt force trauma to the head, and her death was deemed as a homicide. Despite the efforts of dozens of investigators over the years, multiple appeals to the public by police on behalf of her family, Media coverage, both at the time and several subsequent stories as the trail went cold, and a $50,000 reward issued twice by the York Regional Police Services Board, her killer was never found. Until now. York Regional Police, along with many other law enforcement agencies across North America, is taking advantage of advancements in technology to try to close cases that would otherwise remain unsolved. Genetic genealogical data is being used now as an investigative tool to identify suspect DNA left at a crime scene when other investigative leads have been exhausted. Investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG, is used in criminal investigations to identify relatives of the source of the crime scene DNA as a means to then identify the suspect. Having exhausted all traditional investigative means, investigators turn to IGG to assist with the investigation into Yvonne's murder in 2022. Using suspect DNA found at the crime scene, which thankfully was secured at the time and preserved for more than 50 years, a DNA profile was generated. That profile was then uploaded to public genealogical databases. The resulting information, along with an exhaustive review of public and archival records and evidence gathered through traditional police techniques, investigators were able to identify relatives of the suspect, and eventually the suspect himself. We identified Yvonne's killer as Bruce Charles Cantillon. Bruce Cantillon was a 26-year-old who was living in Toronto at the time. He was known to police having committed several violent offenses against women. He had also been incarcerated at various times in his life due to mental health issues. In 1974, 19 months after the murder, Bruce Cantillon committed suicide in Toronto. If he was alive today, he'd be facing a charge of murder. We owe our gratitude to the Leroux family for its ongoing support in very difficult circumstances. Also, as the deputy mentioned, we could not have achieved this result without the help of our law enforcement partners, especially the Toronto Police Homicide Cold Case Unit. Thanks as well to the witnesses in our community and to the media for keeping Yvonne's story in the public eye as best it could. The diligence and dedication of the investigators who worked this case over the last 50 years has finally paid off. The technological advances have opened up new investigative avenues, and we are proud that York Regional Police is at the forefront of leveraging these technologies. We wanted to share with our community at large that Yvonne's murder has been solved, and to reassure other homicide victims' families that York Regional Police won't stop searching for answers. If anyone has any information about this case or any other cold case, please reach out. Our cold case unit investigators are always available. Thank you.
At this time, I am going to read a prepared statement on behalf of Yvonne Leroux's family. Yvonne is far from forgotten, and this has affected our family through many generations. The case has remained a focus of attention in family gatherings and beyond, and has brought experiences that we would not wish on anyone. Unfortunately, this news came late, as many of our family members have recently passed. For over half a century, our family has wondered. Getting some answers will never change what happened or bring her back. We hope that more funding will become available for new advancements in DNA genealogy so that more grieving families can have some form of clarity. Please respect our family's privacy at this time. At this time, we're going to have some Q&A with the officers that are present. Please approach the microphone and ask who you'd like to speak to.
Was she killed before or at the scene? Like, was she killed in Toronto and then her body was taken here, or was she killed in King?
Yvonne was killed where she was found.
So in King.
In King, yes.
Okay. And was she sexually assaulted? Like, or do we have an idea of what his motive was?
That I can't say. I don't know.
Okay. And what was did you know what the DNA was found at the scene? Like,
We do. But I'm
you
not
like to
going to
share
be
it?
discussing it right now.
okay. And when was the case, like, when did you, identify this guy? Like last week, last month, last year? Like when, how long ago?
Well, it's been a long process, and the biggest part is then trying to corroborate the information.
Yeah.
But it was earlier this year that we first learned of Bruce Cantillon.
Okay. And when did you actually confirm it?
It's a good question. The confirmation, it's kind of like a building, like the foundation of the house, putting all the pieces together. But I would say midsummer is when I was confident that we had found Yvonne's killer.
Okay. And is that when you told the family in the summer?
No. We just told the family last week.
Oh, last week. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Hi, was there a previous connection between the killer and the victim? Or was it random?
Not that we know of. I honestly don't know if it was random or not. There's just not enough information to allow us to make that decision.
And there had been speculation in the media that she is being pushed to sell drugs. Did anything come out of that?
No. No information along those lines.
And nothing about a biker gang from Windsor?
That information was brought up originally in the investigation, but as to Bruce's connection with any biker gang or anything, none at all.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I was just wondering if you could maybe give us a little bit more details on how this technology works and what that process is like. I know you did a little bit, but just in terms of what the process actually is of, like, what do you do with the DNA, and then where does it go, and how do you find out kind of who's responsible for it?
Besides what I've already said, I am not the scientific or DNA expert on the actual process, so I'm not going to speak to the intricacies of it, other than it's used. DNA profiles are used and generated to then help us by identifying family members. And then we try to use that along with other investigative techniques to kind of narrow it down.
And I was wondering if you just, I know the deputy chief talked about just the continuance of investigating cold cases. This one's more than half a century old. Can you just talk about what it's like for people in your department when you do have a resolution? I mean, is it relief? Is it, what is the feeling that goes through the department when you finally end up, obviously you help the family, but what is the emotion that goes through the department when you guys kind of come to this conclusion?
Relief is a good word. I hesitate to use the word excitement because, these families have gone through what I couldn't even imagine the experiences. However, going through cold cases is extremely difficult. So yeah, definitely some relief. Definitely just some reassurance that what we're doing is actually making a difference, and we are able to close some of these cases.
Good morning. So I believe you mentioned that the perpetrator took his own life somewhat like 2 years after the incident happened. Did this play into the difficulty of solving this?
Yes, it did, because at that point, all records associated to him pretty much cease. Had he been alive today, like we said, he would have been charged with murder, but then we would have had 50 years of opportunity to gather further evidence and have additional witnesses. So it absolutely made it more difficult because the trail ended with his death.
Thank you.
Good morning. I just wanted to get some clarification on you talked about the genetic profiles and the fact that you were able to get the DNA and then source it against profiles built from other family members' DNA. Is this something that, like, law enforcement profiles would have had that DNA, or through ancestry services? Where did it come from?
So there are, and I'm not going to get into all the details of which sites do what, but there are limited public genealogical websites and companies that allow law enforcement uploads for very specific cases, specifically homicides and sex assaults.
Thank you.
Hi, forgive me if I heard this wrong, but my understanding is that you didn't do the DNA testing until last year, and I'm just wondering why the huge delay if the case is so old.
So a DNA profile, or what we would call a suspect profile, was developed in the early 2000s. However, because Bruce Cantillon, to our knowledge, there's been no other times where his DNA would have been collected for any reason, we never got a hit. Okay. So as a result, the only comparison we could make was when the advent of IgG, and it was our first opportunity to use it, and that took place, like I had mentioned, in 2022.
Okay. And secondly, can you just tell us how family members are feeling? We assume you've spoken to relatives of hers. I know her mother had spoken to the media maybe 6 years ago. We're just wondering if you've spoken to her, or if she's still alive, or if any other family members, or how they're feeling about this finally having some resolution after so long.
I believe for them, this is just the first step in a long process. I can't imagine what they've gone through in the last 51 years. I think our conversation with them, letting them know the resolution, is just kind of like going to be building a foundation for them moving forward. Definitely not easy. I don't want to say they were relieved, appreciative of our work, but this is just going to be the first step in a long relationship we build with the family moving forward.
Thank you.
Right. Were you guys able to identify the murder weapon and what she was hit with?
No, we were not.
And can you just tell us a little bit more about Yvonne as a person, in your experience on this case? What was she like? Who was she?
I'm not gonna comment on I don't feel it's fair for me to comment, only having read reports that were done over 50 years ago. So yeah, I'm not gonna speak to Yvonne as a person. I didn't know her.
Hi there.
Hi.
Just a question about the technology, which
Yes.
you were saying helps to identify relatives. So would you then go and actually meet with these relatives, and what would that exchange have been like, given that their loved one
Right.
would then be, the person who is, inevitably responsible for this murder?
Right. In this case, the relatives were cooperative. Again, extremely difficult for them as well, learning 51 years later that someone they knew had done something so horrible. So yeah, it's not easy for them either.
Are they in York Region? Are they in Toronto?
I'm not going to speak as to anything about any of the surviving family or their whereabouts.
The technology, is it something that you are now applying to other cold cases in York Region that you're looking at?
Yes, it is.
Many cases?
We have several cases on the go, and I'll leave it at that.
And just one last thing about this offender. You said that he'd been incarcerated, he'd had mental health issues. What was his case at that time? Was he potentially on parole? What do we know about him at the time of Yvonne's murder?
At the time of Yvonne's murder, he was out in society. There was no indication. Having said that, the records, as you can imagine from back then, are pretty sparse as well. So I can't confirm explicitly that he wasn't on any sort of conditions, but to my knowledge, from what we've found, he was out living in society at the time.
And you said the charges, though, that he'd faced prior were violence against women.
Yes, he had been charged, and again, I don't know the specific details or the substance of each charge, but he was arrested and charged with offenses against multiple women, following which he was incarcerated.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on one of Karen's questions. With this technology now, you're using it on other cases. Given the result that we have today, does it make you optimistic that you will have more positive resolutions? And does it maybe alter the mood inside your department of there is now this technology that can help you get to the end of the road with a lot of cases?
Absolutely. I think DNA and where we're moving with IgG is kind of the starting point of a resurgence in cold cases. I know we're definitely not the first. We hear about it on almost a monthly basis. Toronto, OPP, forces from all over North America are using it. But absolutely, it's given us hope that we will be able to solve more cases.
And if I could just ask the Deputy Chief a quick question too. Just in general, with murders and violent crimes, time goes past, people tend to forget about it. Can you just talk about why you guys continue to be so relentless? We know that the statute of limitations doesn't go, but just internally, what is it that makes police officers want to continue to pursue those crimes decades after they happened?
I touched on it earlier in my comments when I indicated that our members that are involved in these investigations do develop a true human connection. We may have never met these people, but we feel a connection to them and their families. That is unmistakable. I just noticed that there's another retired detective from homicide, Tim Gore, that would have also worked this case at some point in time. That tells you something. That when people come decades after working a case, it still means something to them. We all own a piece of these individual files. If you would have asked me who Yvonne Leroux was 2 years ago, I could tell you who Yvonne Leroux was. I was a homicide investigator, and every day you walk past a case file with a name of a victim, you feel sad because you haven't brought closure to that victim's family. It's unmistakable, and there's not one member in homicide that doesn't feel the same way. No matter where they come from, we feel a debt to the families to get them the truth. Thank you.
Well, can you tell us about Yvonne then? Like you're saying 2 years ago you could have told us. Can you tell us now about Yvonne?
Well, certainly. I think I'm very sensitive to Detective Nauman's comments here, is that when you look at the previous reporting, you'll have access to the previous reporting that occurred on days, weeks, months, years after Yvonne's death. And when you read the commentary, I'd like to think today that we're much more sensitive. We're much more sensitive to the families as to what we print and how we describe individuals that are involved in these cases. So what I can tell you, Yvonne was a high school student. She was studying down in Toronto, and that she was living a life like any other teenager would at that time. And unfortunate circumstances ended in her death. And that's the truth, and that's what we need to remember, is that it was a young girl whose life was snuffed needlessly.
Do you know the longest time that Cantillon had in custody? I mean, if he had multiple offenses and he's only 26?
I don't personally. I don't know if Jonathan can answer that question.
The longest record that we've been able to identify, he was incarcerated for 6 years.
6 years? So as soon as he became an adult, he was incarcerated?
Essentially, yes.
And is there any way, can you speak if he had a youth record, a juvenile record?
No, I can't.
And he was totally free, like just...
As far as I know, yes. But like I said, the records from that time period are difficult to obtain, so I'm not absolutely sure, but I believe he was free at that time.
Well, okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, folks. We're going to stop the Q&A part right now. I will be able to facilitate one-on-one interviews with anybody that wishes to speak with either the Deputy Chief or the detective. But I'd like to thank everybody for coming. We appreciate your time.